Hello and welcome to Eavesdropping at the Movies.
Hello and welcome to Eavesdropping at the Movies.
I'm Mike.
And I'm Jose. We've just come back from seeing You Were Never Really Here by Lynne Ramsay. We just note with interest, one of the things that kind of struck from the beginning is that it's a film that's made by Amazon Pictures, isn't it?
Amazon Studios, yeah.
Yes.
It's not the first film we've seen by them. Well, maybe, I don't know if it's the first on the podcast.
I can't remember another one.
Well, Manchester by the Sea was made by
right,
them.
okay, yes.
They've made a couple of others, I can't remember off the top of my head right now. Because there's an interesting thing going on between Amazon and Netflix, are these two huge new production sort of studios making movies, and they have these huge internet platforms.
Yeah.
And the kind of central difference between them is that Amazon respects the idea that there's a theatrical window, like the old days,
yes,
where a film is shown there first and then is made available to home media after that, a few months down the line, and Netflix has no interest in that, really.
Yes.
Netflix will release a film to cinemas if it thinks there's a bit of interest.
Yes.
But it's not really asked. And I was thinking particularly about this film Annihilation, that's coming out. It's out in the States at the moment. It's Alex Garland's new film, the guy who made Ex Machina. And everyone adores this thing, and it's not seeing a cinema here,
right,
as far as I know. Maybe it'll get a very tiny run. Yes. I don't know. But it's going straight to Netflix here.
Well, my understanding is that the run for You Were Never Really Here is also quite a small run.
Right.
I
that wouldn't surprise me because it's a kind of small art movie, but I don't think that's out of the ordinary for Amazon Studios.
Right. Well, my point really, the reason why I wanted to discuss it is that if there's ever a movie that needs to be seen in a big screen, this is one of them.
Yeah.
Because it's quite a difficult watch, right? It's a very poetic film, but it's like, the power of those just images and sounds, actually, and certainly Joaquin Phoenix's face. You need a big screen to kind of absorb what is being conveyed through it, I think. Yeah,
and it's a story really being told visually. There's a huge stretch of the film where there's absolutely no dialogue.
Yes.
And it's not as a kind of experiment like The Artist was. It's just the way the story's being told doesn't require dialogue, and it can be told through visuals. Like, for instance, obviously we're going to get into spoiler territory. The basic idea is that Joaquin Phoenix is a hitman who is tasked with saving a sort of 11, 12-year-old girl from sex trafficking. And a small sort of conspiracy is kind of uncovered. And basically, it's about 80 minutes long, I think. And it's like a very, very long, short movie. Do you know what I mean? Like, it has a kind of a simple structure.
Yes.
So it's a kind of really compressed, almost sort of revenge film.
Yes.
But in amongst everything, you get these kind of... The film has a kind of psychologically traumatized editing pattern to it, where his past flashes into his mind and flashes into the film at certain points, and you see these things, these things of... these traumas that he's experienced of abuse as a child by his dad, and these girls in a truck that he wasn't able to save once, and his time as a soldier where he saw a child die. This child abuse is a running thread throughout everything.
Yes.
But it's all told through the editing, right? And it kind of flashes in and comes really quickly. And you don't need... It's a film that requires visual literacy.
Yes.
To understand,
Yes. And oral literacy,
yes.
Actually, because I think particularly at the beginning, it's like you're hearing all of these things without quite seeing anything yet. Right, and kind of the way that the sound weaves into the first images is, and to contrast that with, that I'm going to bake you a cake up light song, that ends the film is really interesting. You could also see how much work the sound does in this film, and I don't just mean the soundtrack really, but kind of the uses of sounds. It's such a beautiful film in that way, really.
Yeah. It's a film that exhibits so much technical knowledge and skill and creativity in a way that seems almost experimental just because it's so clear, right? It's so on the surface that this is the kind of the way it kind of foregrounds everything. So like I was trying to avoid the word superficial because it's not superficial, but it's on the surface. You know what I mean? Like it's not hiding sort of its technique. You see what I mean?
I think it's a film that seems to me almost kind of, I don't know, pregnant with grief or something. Like the grief invades every aspect of this world that we're presented, you know. And I'm not sure if it's like grief or remorse or just sadness, but you know, that seems to be the areas, or those seem to be the areas in which kind of the film is working on. And on the other hand, kind of, you know, there's this presentation of the result of truly extraordinary events. And then the presentation of it as well, as if so quotidian, so everyday life, so actually like almost working class life, right? You know, the relationship between the Joaquin Phoenix character and his mother, you know, the neighbors and the neighbors' kids. And yeah, kind of all of that has almost a touch of like, I don't know, it's in a realist vein or something. Like it evokes a world, doesn't it? A recognizable world. And yet it's all kind of infused with a kind of poetry, you know?
It's like if John Wick was set in the real world.
Yeah. Well,
but I think when you say about grief, I think to me what it really is trauma that pervades the entire thing, which obviously has a relationship with grief, but it's about abuse and people's kind of coping with that, or the way they're unable to cope with it.
Yes,
is what kind of pervades the film for me.
Well, yes,
and that's to say, really, it's fundamentally really about Joaquin Phoenix's character. It's all about him, really.
Yes, I must say, you know, like it initially didn't make sense to me, because what happens is the story is told through these flashes, right? You know, so kind of you see a young boy, but actually I didn't realize that it was him initially, kind of. You know, and then as the film unfolds, you begin, kind
more
of,
details emerge.
More details accumulate.
A slightly clearer picture.
That's right. You know, so, and was it Samantha Morton playing the young mother, or was it just me?
I don't know. Kate Easton.
Right, okay.
The young mother.
Anyway, so kind of all of those things didn't initially make sense to me. Like, you know, the story is actually told in quite a fragmented way. So, you know, on the one hand, it's linear, and actually the linear aspect is almost like you could transpose it into a kind of a conventional hitman film, really, you know. But the way of telling it it lends all this depth and poetry and sadness, right? I mean, I've never seen like a hitman movie which is, you know, on the one hand kind of full of grime, like, you know, so the tools, you know, for committing the killings are quite basic. They're hammers and things like that,
right?
It's
just a hammer.
It's just a hammer.
Basically.
On the other hand, you almost don't see that violence, right? So a lot of the way that the violence is filmed is, you know, through a surveillance camera in which actually it has a corner that you don't see, and that's, you know, where, you know, the hammer is hit on the head or whatever. So actually it avoids, it renders the violence meaningful in a way, because, you know, I'm somebody who really likes violent movies, but part of the pleasure of watching those violent movies is that they're cartoony, right? They're, you know, you in no way take that, you know, as a real thing.
Yeah.
But actually in this film, you kind of do, yeah?
Yeah, well, so there's the one thing which I think about where he infiltrates the house where these girls are being kept and abused, and that's... like about half of that scene is shown through these security cameras, and there's again like a light song playing over the top of that, which is, you suppose, sort of the song playing in the surveillance room.
Yes,
I guess, or like playing in the house, and you don't hear any other sound. So you see from a distance these kind of violent attacks, or they're cut away from very quickly, or they're around a corner, like you say. You don't really see things, and then later on you get to this house where he's basically tracked the girl to, and tracked the kind of evildoers to. And again, it has this kind of John Wick thing of like this. In John Wick, this would be a symphony of violence.
Yes.
And in this, you see these static shots of empty rooms. You get a kind of picture of the house. You get the lobby, and you get the kitchen, and you get the stairs, and these shots are empty. And then it cuts back to it, and there's just a dead body there, and you see Joaquin Phoenix walking off, and you don't see the violence, you see the aftermath of everything. And I think that contributes to that feeling of grief that you were talking about.
Yes.
You see the aftermath. there's very little interest in the killing itself, and the killing is shown briefly once or twice, but that it becomes important when it is.
Yes. I mean, I think, like your use of the word symphony, I mean, I think that would have been a balletic set piece in a John Wick film, and I would have loved it. But this is a completely different kind of film. It's almost like kind of, what's at stake here is, in a way, the feeling. And I think Lynne Ramsay shows you this hitman, in a kind of, in a quotidian way, living like this low, middle class or working class milieu, taking care of his mother, washing up after her, right? And, then going to a drugstore to buy the few tools he needs, to kind of do a killing and get paid for it, right? But I think you're right that kind of what unites the narrative throughout is really, it's child abuse, yeah? And I think it's also clear that he is suffering from some kind of post-traumatic stress disorder.
It's extremely clear, I think, and also he has a pill problem. He goes to get pills illegally from a guy, so it's clear that it's off prescription as well.
Yeah.
He's got I guess it's antidepressants or it's pain. You don't see what the pills are, but it's like Vicodin or Valium or something like that.
Yes. There was something about the editing at the beginning, like just kind of these shots that I think it's going over some bridge and, you see the New York skyline, right? And there was just something about the images, the way they were edited together, the speed of them, that already evoked a kind of sadness and this. Well,
to me, they evoke more of a kind of mental fragility, like an inability to comprehend, to cope with the world around. He lives in New York as well, which is a mental city, the city that never sleeps and so on. And so if you're already in a kind of fragile state mentally, if you come back from the Gulf War and you've seen these tragedies and you've been through tragedy as a child yourself, you think that you could probably use a more calming environment than the centre of New York.
Yes. The film returns to that, though, because you get those images like several times, and they're edited in slightly different ways, right? But this image of crossing the bridge, through the iron grid and the city behind it, and sometimes just not being able to see, and then certain things coming into view, but all kind of slightly disjointed. It's kind of a trope that the film returns to. You see that kind of every time he goes through the bridge, and actually I imagine that it's kind of used slightly differently in each sequence. One certainly feels it, though I wouldn't at this point be able to tell out what exactly that difference is.
Yeah, I would have to see it again.
You'd have to see it again.
I think just briefly return to the idea of PTSD, which is something I wanted to say, which was... so you were talking about it being kind of quotidian, the way he lives. And I think actually that's one of the things that's really interesting is he lives with his mother, who is old and frail and kind of skeletal, and has this kind of shock of white hair that hangs down, and the moment I see her in this kind of slightly dilapidated, cheap sort of apartment or house, I'm thinking, all right, this is Psycho. She's in an armchair, and then she says, "I'm watching Psycho on TV." And the film kind of diffuses that and brings it up and makes a joke of it, and she says, "I'm watching Psycho," and then he imitates a kind of, and they laugh about it, and I think it kind of says like. Well, I suppose at that point in the film, because this is right at the beginning, you don't really know if he's going to turn out to be actually a sort of mental psycho. But as it turns out, you kind of realise he is a normal guy, right? Okay, he's a hitman, but he's a normal guy who has been traumatised into living a certain way and coping with the world a certain way. And actually, he's not I think you might be expecting him to be a psychopath, and he's really not. Even though he's doing very unsavoury things with his life, he's living almost the best way he knows how.
That's right. And actually, I thought that was interesting. And two things that's indicated to me like in several ways, really. And one of them is, when he goes at the end and he finds that his mother has been murdered, and he shoots. There's two people there. He shoots one. And you get the sense that he's going to begin torturing the other. And then, instead of torturing him, he gives him a pill, right? and they hold
painkiller,
hands.
right,
Which actually kind of, you know, you have empathy, right? In a moment like that, which is something that you would expect of something like that. So there is kind of love and empathy and just kind of trying to make do in a situation, trying to make a best of the situation that you're in, which is quite horrible. I mean, the thing that you said about the knife, it was a little bit more complex, because then there's that scene where the mother is bathing and he's waiting for her to come out. And he's playing with that knife, right?
He's dropping it at his feet.
He's dropping it,
moving his foot just out of the way, just in time.
Yeah, and you don't know what's coming with that, right?
Yeah.
Like, you know, so there is a moment you thought, well, he might go psycho on his mom, right? So all of that I found kind of really interesting. And then there are just images in this film that just stay with you, really. Well, we'll see if they'll stay with me, but that I just find they're so beautiful and kind of meaningful. And actually 2 of them have to do with hair. One is when he takes his mom's body to bury it in the only way that he can at that moment, which is, to throw it in a river. And it's like, as the plastic bag sinks into the river, you have her locks of hair just kind of, swirling. And then there's the moment where he rescues the young girl, and she's got like this forelock, that kind of...
Yeah, there's one that seems longer than the rest.
And she's just like flicking it, right? Like, kind of, which I thought was...
And there's water in it, and it's dripping.
Yeah, and it's dripping, and it's very beautiful, actually. I'm not quite sure how to pin a precise meaning on that, really. Probably doesn't have one, but those are kind of images, like, kind of this beautiful young girl, kind of, almost like focusing all her attention on her hair, maybe because she can't think about other things. I thought that was very beautiful.
Yeah. Thinking about the girl, like, she's interesting. She's the daughter of a governor who has been kidnapped and made to work in sex slavery. And you get the impression, I think, Joaquin Phoenix's character does kind of start to put this all together at one point in his head, or do the best he can. And I think the impression that I got from the kind of fragmented things you're given by the film, the fragmented images, is that her dad deliberately sold her into sex slavery to win favour.
Yeah, for political advantage.
Yeah, for political advantage with this governor who's higher up. And then, because it all kicks off with this text that guy receives, that the dad receives, with the address of where she's being kept. And I think that's a pang of conscience, which you think is probably appropriate for his daughter. And that's when he says, okay, you need to go to this address and I want you to hurt them. Because then the dad ends up getting killed.
Yes.
Well, dying. But then Joaquin Phoenix suspects it's a murder because he was kind of going back on this. So the girl is a victim the entire way through. You don't really... Well, no,
until the end.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's not fair to say you don't see anything else for her, but... Because you do right at the end, and she kind of embraces this freedom that she's been granted by Joaquin Phoenix, who's eventually managed to save her, and she says it's a beautiful day. The ending is actually fucking amazing, I think. The ending is... They're sat in this diner, not sure what to do now that he's managed to get her free, and he's got no mother anymore and no job, I suppose. Like, he wants to get rid of that. And the girl obviously is free of everything. And then he has this violent suicidal fantasy of just shooting himself in the middle of the diner, and then very quickly realises he hasn't actually done that, and he's collapsed into unconsciousness while having this fantasy. And then the girl kind of revives him, says, wake up, and she says it's a beautiful day. And it's a beautiful day, and the film ends.
But I was thinking a little bit earlier where he goes to rescue the young girl, and he sneaks into the governor's house or whatever he is, somebody higher up than the father.
Yeah.
And he arrives only to find that the guy's throat has been slashed.
Yeah.
And then he goes to search for the girl, and he finds her calmly eating a bloodied breakfast. A breakfast with, a utensil that's full of blood. And there's some indication that she did it.
I think it's very clear that she did it.
Okay,
Who else
there
in
you
this?
go.
Well, who else in this house would have done it for one thing?
Exactly. Right.
She's the victim there, and everyone else is.
Yeah, and she's calmly eating her breakfast. Obviously, like, you know, traumatized and so on, but no longer a victim, right? Like, you know, somebody who's fought back. It's a very powerful image and situation, actually. I think just the image of the plate with the bloodied knife of that breakfast and her eating calmly. So the situation is very powerful, but also the image is very powerful.
And then he finds her and he kind of, I can't remember that well, to be honest, but does he kind of comfort her? Or at least he kind of kneels by her.
Yes.
And he's glad that she's okay. But you get this kind of feeling of he wishes that if only she hadn't had to, like, she's gone through so much already, if only she hadn't had to go through another type of trauma.
Yes.
That, like, he could have taken that on for her.
Yes.
You know.
Because
which is the job of adults. Adults are there to take on trauma for their kids, basically.
Yes.
I think.
Well, you know.
Well, that's why, I mean, with all this fucking school shooting stuff happening in America, it's absolutely appalling that kids are being told this is how you save yourself from a madman with a gun.
Yes.
And it might happen to you. And it's like, unfortunately, it's true that it might happen to you. That's the really sad part of it. But I think it's also true that, like, parents should take the responsibility of, like, this isn't going to happen to you. This is what I would tell my kid, I think. I would try to. This isn't going to happen to you. You will be fine, because it's my job as a parent to have that burden.
Yes.
And then when you're a grown-up and you have kids, you take it on for your kids.
But
anyway,
the world of this film is one where the parents abuse their children and cause them trauma or sell them.
Yes.
You know, because... and I think actually part of the narrative and part of, in a way, why it's so moving is he rescues her only to deliver her to the man who sold her off in the first place, right? You know, so it's kind of...
unintentionally, of course.
Yeah, unintentionally.
But yes,
but
right.
that's the effect, that the result of his actions are that he's delivered her to a worse place, possibly, than what she began with, really. You know, so... Or at least as bad a place. So, yeah. Anyway, but that's the plot. I mean,
but the film ends with a kind of success in that respect, right? They do manage to sort of win as best they can. They defeat the people who were holding her and abusing her.
It's a happy ending that the film offers us. But what did you feel like throughout the film? What are what are the dominant emotions that you remember, and at which points?
I don't want to say the film didn't make me feel, but I found it more intellectual than emotional for the most part. It was by the very ending, as in the last shot was where I felt kind of, that was where I almost felt like it was okay for me to feel something, because up until then you really don't know what's going to happen and how long it's going to be as well, for one thing. The film is quite brief. It feels quite brief. I mean, it's a feature film length, but it feels tight and brief, and so it's actually quite fast. I mean, I was thinking, compared to We Need to Talk About Kevin, which to me felt kind of ponderous, and it's about 20 minutes longer than this, so it's not a huge kind of excursion in length, but it felt a lot slower and a lot longer than this did, and so. You were never really here kind of struck me personally as a kind of intellectual exercise for me to interpret it and understand it. And then right at the end, when the credits roll and I knew this was the end now, I kind of started to process everything that I'd just seen, which is not to say that like a film like Mother, for instance, which was nuts and all over the place, and you thought you couldn't really keep up. It's not like that, but it's Lynne Ramsay. You kind of there's a kind of a demand on you as an audience member to be interpreting it, because she's a really interesting, strong kind of visual storyteller, and it's just in a way that so many filmmakers aren't really. And she makes demands on you that you don't normally get.
That's right.
And so by the end, I kind of thought, now I can start to process everything.
Yes. I mean, I think there was a man that walked out,
I think he came back.
Oh, you're right. Okay. Well,
yeah, I noticed him as well.
And I was thinking, if you've come to this movie to be entertained, right? Kind of, this is not the movie for you, because it is a film that makes quite a lot of demands. I mean, you're asked to kind of, immerse yourself in this world and actually interpret these sounds and images and kind of, and actually to a large extent, you're also asked to piece them together.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. And like you said, initially it feels that it could be going in various directions. Like you don't exactly know kind of where it's going. It's not like one of those films where in the first 5 minutes you know the end, right? Like, or you know the story, right? Kind of this kind, at the end it all makes sense, but until then it could go in various directions, which, I think in a way it's kind of fantastic storytelling. But it does require, the viewer to kind of piece those things together in a way that is quite challenging, really. What do you want to say about Joaquin Phoenix?
I don't have words to describe his performance other than it was fucking brilliant. I can't describe it, and it's...
For me, I thought he was absolutely great. And one of the things that I noticed is that whenever he's got a mission, he's smart, he knows exactly what it's doing, he's calculated, his body moves freely, and he completes the actions efficiently and well. Right? It's almost like, he's got freedom in those actions. All the other bits, it's like he's absolutely self-contained. It's like, and actually I thought it was one of those things because, he is communicating so much, but he's communicating so much by almost holding himself completely in, right? Like kind of, there are moments where you're trying to read what he's feeling, and actually all you can read is that he's holding it in, right? Yeah. But, then there were aspects of his body and his walk. I mean, I found his body like really interesting, because it's like almost somebody who had, who's done exercise, but who's let himself go, right? Like, so, he's still quite muscular, but it's not like
it's underneath a layer of fat.
Yeah, exactly,
Yeah.
I found his beard like also kind of fascinating, really, because it is like, again, somebody who's let himself go, so it's all like bushy underneath where no one can see it, right? It hasn't been shaved off. So I I think those are all kind of like really interesting moments where you get a sense of pain, really, and
you get the feeling that he's kind of hiding behind himself, don't you?
Yeah.
The kind of the layer of chubbiness on him, and he's really hiding within his own face, behind that beard and behind that hair. He's hiding himself behind it, and then there's a few points where he actually makes eye contact with someone, and it's actually quite important, right? Like right at the end, across that diner, he makes eye contact with the girl, and they connect.
Yes.
And it's notable. It seems rare in the context of everything else in the film.
Yes. I mean, for me, those things are in a way tied together. So the thing about, the guy who he shot reaching out his hand and kind of giving that moment of final comfort of human connection, I thought that was kind of, quite incredible and unique. I've never seen that before, and it is a moment of empathy. And actually, I think the look with the girl at the end is so interesting because, the moment that he rescues her, he looks, and it's almost like he doesn't know what to say. What can you say in a situation where a girl has been put through that, right? Like, and I can't remember if there's any dialogue even, really. So in contrast to the end, where you do feel, okay, now, a human connection has been made, right? And how important that is, rather than, this kind of self-contained living in your head because like the outside was just so horrible, and the only time that you see him kind of in other places having the thing that is almost like uniquely provided in those moments I'm describing is really the banter with his mom. Yeah, that you do get a sense of like openness and play and
Yeah, well, they've obviously connected years and years ago over abuse by the dad because she was abused as well.
Yeah.
You see her in the flashbacks hiding under the bed.
Yes.
So they share that between them, and that I guess kind of gives them. I mean, well, obviously they're mother and son, right? So like they're connected throughout, but also they're connected through something very specific that the film shows you.
Yeah.
Which is the abuse by the dad.
Do you want to talk a little bit about the soundtrack? Because you
Well, yeah. So I noticed at the end that it's soundtrack is by Johnny Greenwood. It's scored by Johnny Greenwood. I think there's also quite a lot of pop music and found music in there as well. So I'd be interested to kind of basically... I'd be interested to see the film again for the soundtrack, and I'd be interested to listen to the soundtrack. I mentioned to you that Johnny Greenwood should have won the Oscar the other day. He didn't because, the Academy...
You put it more eloquently, instead of that pingy-pongy shape of water.
Instead of fucking shape of water, plinky-plonky bullshit. I suppose, a delicate, interesting, rich score for the Phantom Thread. Well, I suppose then it just made me think, like, a film like this will never be seen anywhere near an Oscar, Yeah. And it's an absolute trap. Like that, I bet that this film could well be in your top 2 or 3 by the end of the year.
Oh, without a doubt.
And it'll never get anywhere near the Oscars. This, or
but in a way, I don't...
Upstream Colour, or that.
Yeah, but it doesn't matter, because these are films that I think will be around for a really long time, and they'll be looked at and studied and discussed, so in a way that actually many Oscar films won't, so it doesn't matter.
I know, but it's just one of those things, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I think, the one thing is, in a way, or a concern of mine is, I think these are films now, and they're so great, but actually they do require a kind of visual literacy. You've got to kind of pay attention, and try to piece things together, and kind of look and listen, right? Yeah. And then before you can piece it on in your own head. And actually my worry is that, a mainstream audience no longer knows how to do that. I mean, I in spite of seeing so many things, I don't think that a mainstream audience actually has the visual literacy to see a film like this, and they just won't.
Well, I think that the thing about visual literacy is, if you compare it to literacy, just literacy, as in reading.
Yes.
There's a kind of assumption, I think, or an unstated assumption, that films are easy.
Yes.
And films should be easy to watch. And if films aren't easy to watch, then they don't make sense.
Yes, well, I don't agree with that.
And if you were to compare that to literature, then it's sort of like saying, like, all books are as easy to read as Harry Potter. And if you come across something that's more challenging to actually literally to understand on the page, with kind of longer sentences and more complex grammar and so on and so forth, then it's sort of the book's fault for not being easy to understand.
Exactly.
No one says that about a book,
exactly.
right? But it's kind of the way we seem to think about movies.
That's right, and I think it's wrong. And kind of, this is a film that requires a high level of cinematic literacy. It's very it's kind of using the medium in all of these, really fascinating ways, and almost in a kind of, I hesitate the word to use fullness, but in a varied, interesting and complex way, right? Like kind of, it's making use of sights and sounds in various ways to communicate kind of particular meanings, really, and feelings, so, and I just think actually that, we grow up in a visual world, we have images everywhere, right? But just because we're surrounded by images doesn't actually mean that kind of we know how to understand them all. It could just mean that that we can understand the basics, like like reading the sun instead of reading Shakespeare.
Well, it's the thing of, like, when I went to university, obviously was taught by you doing film, and that was in kind of early 2010s. It was 2007 to 2010 or so. And the attitude was very clearly sort of, what are you doing that for? You never get a job, or blah, blah, blah. And that's been the attitude of kind of media studies, and similar disciplines for years and years and years. This will never lead to anything. It's you're just mucking around at uni and so on. And then, like, you look at a world in which there's fake news all over the shop and Donald Trump's in government. You go, like, the people who we really need are the people who understand the kind of images that are being kind of spread far and wide, that have helped someone like Donald Trump make his way into power. It's like those people actually, and this sounds in a way kind of high-minded, it's not meant to be that. It's just meant to be a kind of, there is value in these things beyond whether you get a job or not. And these are things that you really need, like, for a full and varied society. You need these things.
I mean, I also just kind of mention this because, it seems to me that over the course of the year, like, what I see as just a kind of shocking kind of readings of films that I think actually, indicate a lack of visual literacy. I'm thinking particularly, in some of the reception around Blade Runner 249 and things like that. That to me kind of indicated that, kind of people just, they might have seen the film, but they didn't understand it very well. And actually that was related to visual literacy. Anyway, just to get back to this film, it is one that makes demands on you, and that you have to give yourself over to it. And it's, it is a complex film. But I think it's a truly great film that will be discussed for a really long time.
What I would say as well is the idea that it's a complex film that requires your attention and requires your input to make sense of does not mean it's a film that's devoid of pleasure.
Yes.
It's a film that has many, many pleasures, and not just of the kind of intellectual stuff, but actually kind of it's a film which is really functionally exciting at points. Like, for instance, when he's chasing down this car to the house that eventually is like the final house that he saves the girl from at the end. He follows this car, and it's basically it's the bit in the revenge movie where you approach the kind of centerpiece climactic environment, right? So like you get to this house and it's shown to you in this kind of and the soundtrack fits in, and you have this kind of planimetric big shot that shows the house right there. You go, this is where the set piece is going to be. But that whole section is really functional in kind of the way it makes a chase exciting. It's following and following, following, and it's not done in a purely conventional way. It's like the editing is kind of it's almost like sort of jump cuts along the road as he's following this car down one road then another. But it's exciting and it's tense, and it's building up to something that's going to happen, and it's viscerally pleasurable, So even though it's a film that kind of, it's not about luxuriating in violence, and it's not about the excitement of the fights, it deliberately eschews all of that. It has great pleasures,
yes,
kind of visually and through the editing and so on.
Yeah, I mean, for me, a lot of those pleasures are just like, it's almost like the pleasures of poetry or something, like that image of him sinking into the water in his suit, but somehow illuminated or purified or something, is it, accompanying his mom's body or something. And then actually kind of the beauty of the hair swirling in the ocean, and, it kind of is, I found it so moving. It's also, it somehow seemed to represent kind of, what that mother meant to him, like, the silver hair swirling beautifully, elegantly, but kind of sinking. I mean, you can't quite put your finger on, this means this or something. Yeah, but kind of the connection between those two images is really kind of something extremely beautiful to me.
Yeah, and then the mother turns into the girl. Like, as he looks down, the mother sinks away. He looks down and he expects to see his mother, I guess, but he sees the girl instead. And so there's this kind of connection of, like, that becomes sort of... He sees the girl underwater, swims back up to the surface, and then straight away he's striding off deliberately and forcefully. He's going towards the camera, and the camera's tracking back, and it's like he's got his mission to save the girl, He's taken it upon himself now, and it's like the death of his mother has kind of catalysed that and made that happen.
What did you make of the sound at the very end, just the last shots? Because there's all these people, they're chattering in the diner, aren't they?
Yeah, about nothing in particular. It's just diner noise.
And it was almost like, I shouldn't have sugar, and but this doesn't have much sugar. So it's almost like just normal life is somehow...
It's emphasising there's a kind of these extraordinary things that happen in the world where everyone's just living their lives and have no idea.
And worrying about sugar.
Yeah.
I thought that was also quite
life
wonderful.
Goes on.
Yeah. All right. So let's wrap up. Kind of final words.
I thought it was pretty brilliant, and I loved it, and I liked it more. I haven't seen We Need to Talk About Kevin since it came out.
Yes.
I remember having a bit of a shonky time during it. I need to see that film again, but I think on reflection I would probably end up preferring this one still.
I think for me, without a doubt.
I appreciate that it's a little more in a way friendly to watch, or like it feels like it wants you to have a better time than we need to talk about Kevin did. Is that fair to say?
No, I think I would argue I would argue almost kind of like the opposite, really. That kind of, to me, we need to talk about Kevin offers more traditional pleasures. You know? And the pleasure of the character, the tone, it felt less experimental than this one did to me, but I like this one much better.
Actually, that's an interesting thing, because like when you think about it, this film is probably for a lot of people pretty hard going to watch. I mean, you at points were kind of going ugh when like he pulls his tooth and then he shoots himself at the end in that vision. And it's not to say that like I'm inured to that or I love that sort of stuff, but I didn't feel that. Like that was some of the exciting stuff to me. And thinking back to like Mother as well, Mother is one that people absolutely hated for the kind of visual madness and the madness of the story and kind of just what you were expected to believe was happening. And again, I love that.
I love that as well.
So, maybe that's just my taste. Well, it clearly is.
Clearly it's your taste.
Clearly it's just a taste thing.
But aside from your taste, there are also, I would argue, levels of discernment, really. And I do think there's a difference. If you, and I mean, this is a very traditional argument. Yeah. But to me, there is a big difference between approaching art and approaching kind of entertainment. There just is. If you go with the idea that somehow the film has to please you, right, then it's no surprise that something like Mother doesn't, because it assaults you, right?
Yeah.
But if you go in with the idea that you're open to having an aesthetic experience, can put yourself in the hand of these artists, right? Then kind of you go with whatever they offer you. And actually, shock and revulsion, is probably a good thing, which I think is partly, what Mother offered. But that's not a fault.
I think the other thing it reminded me of was Happy End, which we both came out of Michael Haneke's Happy End thinking we were surprised at what a good time we'd had during it. It's not something you expect from Michael Haneke.
Yes.
And it made me think about that in this, because obviously, actually, when you think about it, like this is a film about child abuse and about revenge and violence. You should be having a pretty rough time during this. And I wasn't at all.
Okay, good. Anyway, I think we both recommend that people go see this. And we'll probably be seeing it again.
A quick word, perhaps, on the Oscars, because we haven't spoken about them. We both stayed up. I came around here to watch them with you.
Oh, right, okay. So, and then we didn't have the energy to talk about them.
No. Well, you were falling asleep.
I was falling asleep.
So you're happy with Shape of Water winning Best Picture? I think?
I am. I mean, it's not my favorite film of the year. But I think my favorite film of last year wasn't even nominated, really.
Yeah, absolutely. We're both still in agreement with Blade Runner.
Yeah, I think my Blade Runner is my film of the year. So I kind of, I don't know. I mean, I have a whole history and nostalgia about the Oscars, because I always associate them with being like a teenager and a young adult in Canada, and it was always an occasion for a party. And really kind of, part of the value is political, and national. And there were so many things. I mean, I remember kind of when the first openly gay person kind of acknowledged his partner, and we all cried watching it. It was very moving, right? So I don't think the Oscars has that function anymore, really. No, people aren't invested in it in the way that they were, because there's so many other things in media and so on going on. On the other hand, it's not without significance, right? And people have already been talking about some of the strands of significance in the Oscars. For example, Guillermo del Toro winning an achievement not only as a Mexican, right, but also his history with Iñárritu and what's the other one? The guy who directed Cuarón, yeah.
Isn't he Spanish, Cuarón?
No, the Mexican.
Oh, okay.
So like the Three Amigos is the Rochoses.
I was going to say, people don't make an awful lot about him being Mexican, but that seems to forget that Iñárritu's won it twice in recent years.
Yeah, no, they haven't forgotten. I mean, there's a whole narrative about that, about Guillermo del Toro saying, well, kind of, Cuarón I don't want it. And I said, well, the chances of 2 Mexicans winning it, you know, there's less of a chance for me getting it.
Right.
You know, then Iñárritu got it, and then, oh my God, then it's infinitesimal with my chance of getting it. And then Iñárritu got it twice, and then it's like, I'll never get it. Right? Like, and then he got it.
Yeah.
So anyway, you know, there's a narrative around that. You know, there's a narrative around Coco. You know, there was a narrative around Frances McDormand winning.
That's been quite a big deal. I mean,
yeah.
At least that's what I've been more aware of is Frances McDormand and the conversation around her. Because what you say about there being kind of much more media these days than there was, and so it's kind of less important. I think there's also an element of truth to that in that there's the media landscape is not as compressed as it used to be. You know, it used to be that you had 2 or 3 channels and newspapers and all that. You know, so it kind of what was said on one particular form of media was defining. You know, it was kind of shaped the conversation for everybody. Whereas now there's Twitter and there's all sorts of social media and loads of websites and blah blah blah. But even though that's all become very spread out, they're still all talking about a few things.
Yes.
And one of them was Frances McDormand's speech, which everybody took notice of.
That's right. So I think the film still, you know, people have been like putting too much weight on it as some kind of marker of, you know, a film's quality, which I suppose in a way it always is. You know, but serious critics have never taken the Oscars as any barometer of a film's quality. I mean, it's always a barometer of what the Hollywood community likes that year and what, you know, it thinks reflects them, right? Because it's like the whole Academy votes on it, right? So I think the nominations mean one thing, the winners mean something else. It all tells us a lot about American culture, right? But, you know, as a barometer of quality, it's only in so far as that what this particular group of people, for many reasons, many of which are political, you know, want to give the award to something. And actually very few of the films that win Academy Awards are actually the films that last.
Well, one thing I think that is true about the Oscars, which I think people don't tend to think about that much, is they show the people who have the money that there is more to making movies than money.
Well,
I think that's really true. Like it says, you know, there is even though there may be kind of political things going on behind the scenes as to what you want to vote for and what you don't want to vote for and what you want to recognise for whatever reasons, there is artistic and cultural value to these things, and that's the business that you're in.
I mean, one of the things that I was shocked by, or shocked is too strong a word, that surprised me, is I circulated on Facebook. There was this dossier, you know, that came out of like the Oscar-nominated films and what their budgets were and their release patterns, and you know, it was a workflow. That's what it was. Right. It was a workflow of Oscar-nominated films. And actually, what surprised me is how low budget almost all of the Oscar-nominated films, except for Dunkirk, was it?
Yeah, Dunkirk was 100 million or so.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I think Call Me By Your Name was just a few million. I was surprised to see that something as fantastical and with that look and those effects and so on as Shape of Water, it only cost 19 million. And actually, the budget for Phantom Thread was twice the budget for, you know, The Shape of Water. So that, you know, but in any case, all of those films that seem so rich and so on, you know, 10 years ago, these would have been really low budget films. I mean, if you think that, you know, any Hollywood film 10, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, starring Mel Gibson, Julia Roberts, Tom Hanks, Tom Cruise, the budget of The Shape of Water would have been only part of their salary.
Oh, sure, yeah.
You know?
Well, that's only part of what I was going to say with Shape of Water. Like, the biggest star in that is either Sally Hawkins or Richard Jenkins, which is not a huge star either way.
Yes.
So that money has gone on set design and effects and so on.
The money's on screen.
The money's absolutely on screen, and with something like Phantom Thread, like there's probably a little bit more money going to the stars, but not very much. Again, I think that's money that's gone into production primarily. And I think you may well argue actually you can see kind of less of it on screen than you can with Shape of Water, but there's a kind of sumptuousness in the production of that film.
Yes.
Particularly shooting on film.
Yes. But for a Hollywood film, you know, something like Phantom Thread would have been considered like a median budget film. you know, because it does have a star. You know, but then all the others, it's very low budget. I mean, you know, I was surprised. So in a way, the good thing about the Oscars is that it gives, you know, an airing to these films that cost a tenth. The Shape of Water cost a tenth of, you know, what a Marvel film costs, right? Yeah, like 20 million as opposed to 200 million. So, I mean, you know, that's in itself a good thing. You know, and hopefully kind of it'll give it a platform so that more people across the world can see it than they otherwise would have. And that applies to, I think, all the nominees, which is why I personally think it's a good thing to nominate 10 films instead of 5.
Yeah.
So, anyway, anything you want to say? Because I feel I've hogged this part of the
No,
discussion.
I don't mind. I would say I was really, really pleased that Get Out won for screenplay.
Yes.
And you know, loads been made of kind of whether that's a political thing or not. It doesn't matter. Like, it fucking deserved it, and it was really great to see Jordan Peele up on stage receiving that award. Like, I mean, it's one of the things that I suppose it kind of goes slightly in hand with what you're saying about the budgets of films. Like, actually, you would expect kind of films on the lower end in their budgets a lot of the time to be up for the big awards, because they tend to be the films that, like a Marvel film, a $200 million Marvel film is kind of, it has the edges shaved off, you know, like, yes. And it's not going to be a film that's kind of, well, up until Black Panther, it's not going to be a film that's kind of pushing any envelopes, you know.
Yeah.
It tends to be the films which are lower budget and lower risk for that reason that are doing that, and therefore are getting the kind of awards attention. But that kind of slightly seems to go hand in hand with a sort of divisiveness sometimes, kind of not necessarily being there to please an audience. And something like Get Out, I mean, it's a horror movie basically. And we were talking to each other, we were saying the last horror movie that was up for big awards and actually won any was Silence of the Lambs, right?
Yes.
Which is 1991.
Yes.
So Get Out is kind of a really in-your-face horror movie, and it's great that it's sort of amongst the crowd that was,
I mean, it was amazing
getting nominated and winning.
It was amazing that it was nominated at all. Kind of, you know, if you look at like a history of the Academy Awards, you know, I mean, a tiny budget, because, you know, I think if we're talking about a small budget for The Shape of Water, this was like tiny. It was 5 or 6 million. For Get Out, right? So for you know, a tiny budgeted horror film with no stars to have been nominated for an Academy Award at all, that would have been unthinkable a generation ago. I mean, if we're talking about Silence of the Lambs, that had Jodie Foster and Anthony Hopkins when, you know, Jodie Foster was at her peak. I think she just won the Academy Award and this was her second one, right? Yeah. So that was, you know, that was a relatively decent budget Hollywood film with big stars. You know, kind of Get Out is incomparable. Get Out is like as if Halloween had been nominated for an Oscar or something, right?
Yeah.
All right, good. Let's end it here.
Yes.